Hello and welcome. In this episode, the complete collapse of the Russian Charkiw front, at least it looks as it, and a rapidly developing situation that it's actually hard keeping up, combined with success reports basically from every area of the whole front line, some of it highly likely fake. I need to apologize in the beginning for this still German intro. This is not the highest priority yet. I will replace that fairly soon. This time I'll have to split the screen to allow for the wide number of postings. And in the beginning, I need to clarify that currently the internet is getting flooded with success messages. Some of them seem to be rather ludicrous. As of now, every pro-Ukrainian account is just throwing things out that cannot be confirmed. I wouldn't wonder if within the next 24 hours we would see a report of someone claiming that Belgorod up here has been captured by the Ukrainians. So there is some limit to what we can report, to what can be confirmed. The exact front line right now, there are reports then some claiming right now they are in Voshansk. I haven't found any proof. That doesn't mean they aren't there yet. In the end, it doesn't really matter if Hontarivka now is conquered, because it seems if it's not liberated yet, it will be probably will be within the next 24 hours. But let's start at this. On the 7th of September, there were still smaller Russian attacks north of Kharkiv in the direction of the city, but no successes, no territory gained. Since then, there seem to have been Ukrainian counterattacks that liberated Dementivka, Male Vesele, that should be here, and Sosnivka, which is up here. And there again we see some problem because the publicly available maps only work with information that are open sourced, as the armed forces rarely publish any proper maps. And Sosnivka, according to this map, for instance, never ever even was under Russian occupation. As we see, it's not even marked as a former conquered territory, but now, according to Ukrainian sources, it was liberated. The Russian sources report Ukrainian sabotage activity far behind the front line in Vovchansk, Hynlitsia, and Bili Koludyas. Here, and I'm not exactly sure where the other is. Now, that happened on the 7th, likely. On the 7th, far behind the front line, and it seems likely that it was in cooperation with in coordination with the offensive to coordinate with it. The Ukrainians. The Russians say it was sabotage. It might have been special forces, or it might have been partisans. As of now, we can't really confirm it. But the Russians themselves said there was sabotage activity here, and that is quite important. And here is on those two towns I was able to identify is one of the railroads going to Kupiansk, and thus a clear combination, in clear connection to the current offensive, as it was apparently a form of preparation for the Ukrainian advance. Also interesting, in past situation reports, I reported that the Russians talked about increased artillery activity southeast of Kharkiv. At that point, I actually didn't even think anything about it. I just reported it. I guess now we know why the Ukrainians concentrated their artillery in this situation. For 4 days now, roughly 4 days, the big Ukrainian offensive is going. It developed fairly modest in the beginning. They crossed the river here to Verbivka, liberated it. Then they pushed a little further north, isolating Balaklia. And since then, it seems to go further and further, faster and faster. By now, they've reached Kupiansk. I have here the video of them being on a rooftop in Kupiansk on the western side. We see here a video of the bridge through Kupiansk that was obviously heavily hit and is maybe still passable for infantry, for people walking, but definitely no longer for vehicles, and the road bridge should be this one. And according to the map and according to everything I found out, the eastern part of the town is still in Russian hand. So here the Ukrainians made the decision to blow up the bridge, to destroy the bridge, to prevent the Russians from threatening their flank, concentrating on liberating everything west on the right side of the Oskil River, down to Izium, and now pushing further north towards Vovchansk and the supply lines towards Kupiansk in this case. By blowing up the bridge, they obviously, that concentration transportation hub cannot be used without a bridge to attack the Ukrainian flank here. They've given that up, their own opportunity to push further, but in this situation, at least that was the tactical decision they took, which seems to make some sense in this regard, as they concentrated on gaining what they could at that point. The Ukrainian General Staff is saying in occupied territories, fighting age males are being deported and as of now brought to Vovchansk to prevent them cooperating with Ukrainian troops. Seeing the experiences in other occupied areas, there might at least be some threat of them being forced into militias, into troops fighting for the Russian regime in this case, as it has happened in Donbas and as citizens of Melitopol and of Zaporizhia are facing in those last days. But there is no proof of that, and as a lot of people are new here, I need to explain that if the Ukrainian General Staff says something, we need to take it with a pinch of salt, as obviously the Ukrainian General Staff, as the Ukrainian intelligence agencies, are participants, active participants in a war, and they have an intention that will reflect in what they are reporting. They have an intention of falsifying, of influencing whatever they report, both for domestic audience as well as for international audience. So whatever they report, we need to see with some grain of salt to judge it accordingly and not take everything not believe everything immediately. The Further north from Kupiansk, we have reports of them heading towards Veliki Burluk. I've heard the latest rumor that they've already reached it. As of now, it is unclear how far they've come. There was one video claiming to be in Vovchansk, Ukrainian flag raised, but then again, it didn't show any angle. The person raising the flag was hidden with a symbol on the video. So as of now, we can't confirm anything. It's clear that they are advancing further northwest, putting pressure, keeping pressure on the Russians, seemingly without much problems. In the south, they have reached Izium. I have a video here, and I also need to say I got up this morning at 6:30 to start my day, and since then I've prepared the same video for the German channel where I had an over 3.5 hour live stream just before that. So since then I wasn't completely able to update. There might be slight changes since then. I need to apologize for that, but as you can guess, during 3.5 hours of live stream I wasn't able to do additional research. So here we had a video of Ukrainian special forces reaching Izium. That tower here was geo-confirmed, and the latest reports is that Ukrainian forces have entered Izium, and apparently the Russians have evacuated it by now. As some say, for revenge. Where do we have it? We might have it somewhere else later. I thought I had it here. I apologize for that. Charkiw is being bombarded with multiple launch rocket systems, probably Grad or Smerch longer range systems. Some sources claim it's supposedly a revenge for the Russian advances here, but especially those few of you who speak German and have followed my German status reports will know that basically this is a permanent theme happening in Kharkiv, that for the last months, basically daily, the city was under rocket fire, under rocket attack by the Russians. So in this case, it at least is nothing new. In the Donbas, we have some interesting news. For instance, the latest reports were that on the 7th and on the 8th, there still had been attacks towards Dolina and Bohorodichne. Also attacks at Dibrivne and Dovenke. here, and here. So along the southern front, they were still attacking while the Ukrainians were already breaking through on this part, which would again prove what I said in past situation reports, that the attacks here towards Sloviansk by now are reduced to fixing actions, as they didn't show the intensity anymore that it would make us expect that they were aiming at real territorial gain. As of now, as you can guess, now the attack should probably be over. There are also reports about attacks in the same period as that situation report summarizes basically what happened since Wednesday. So in this record, there were reports about further Russian attacks between the front line of Siversk to Soledar around this line. Again, here it seems to be mostly a fixing operation. And the latest rumor is appearing this morning, rumor all across the pro-Ukrainian internet, but I have not seen any proof yet, is that supposedly the Ukrainians went into the offensive here. That would, as those of you who have seen my breaking news, I think it was the second to last breaking news where I said that reinforcements were filmed in the Donbas, that this might mean they actually weaken the front lines to the Donbas, which might open up opportunities for the Ukrainians here. And this might be an exploitation of this. But as of now, I think we should not take it at face value, as I have not seen evidence yet. This is supposedly evidence. We see some armored vehicle driving here from this point. Probably an MTLB. I can't really say it. Unfortunately, my Cyrillic is rather rusty. That is supposed to say us something, but I also can't say at what time it was taken. This is supposedly showing us Ukrainian advancing somewhere in Sloviansk. That could be the refinery that is next to Lysychansk, but as of now, I can't by any way prove it. And as said, it's one of the rumors, and at least I didn't have the opportunity to find any proof. By the way, the same rumor is currently going around that the airport here was captured by Ukrainian forces. Again, no proof whatsoever, at least as I had found as of now. Where there are advances, there is still activity happening, and there's actually a part of the front where the Russians still had the initiative, at least until I started this situation report, and that's basically the area between Soledar and Zaitsevo, down here east of Bakhmut. Soledar, now there are reports the Russians claim they have entered the civilian area of Soledar, where the civilian housing is. The Ukrainians say they forced them back, they pushed them back. It is unclear yet whether the Russians actually gained something here, but Soledar is under heavy attack for weeks now, as it is obviously at the entrance to two lines of communication north between Bakhmut and Siversk, which offer the Ukrainians perfect communication behind their front line east for reinforcements, for resupply, and they offer them the advantage of the inner line in case of Russian attack, allow easy redeployment of forces between Siversk and Bakhmut. Should the Russians cut them by reaching Blahodatne, that would weaken the whole front line. It would not necessarily mean it collapses in total. As we can see, there are some lines of communication west still remaining, but the big advantage of the current line, which allows for redeployment from Bakhmut to Siversk, would severely be hampered. So we see that obviously the Russians have realized that themselves and thus are attacking Soledar for weeks now, but as of now the reports are they haven't really gained much ground at all. There are reports about further attacks on the towns further south. I need to see, because my reports are always okay. Attacks further south, I don't really have much proof of recent gains here. Recently, the Russians gained where is it? Kodema. They have conquered that. So in this area, the Russians slowly gain ground, but not too much. But still, over the last months, they are slowly but steadily pushing them forward, likely aiming to bypass Bakhmut and force the Ukrainians to evacuate rather than engage in high casualty house-to-house combat. Because if they manage to threaten encirclement, the Ukrainians would see themselves faced with a situation of either repeating Mariupol or withdrawing their forces. Further south, there is more attacks along the close to Donetsk city, west around Avdiivka mostly. Again, here the same situations. The Russians want to threaten Avdiivka with encirclement, which is one of the strong points of the Ukrainian defense along the line of contact. Here again, they want to mostly prevent frontal attacks and house-to-house fighting, even though there are reports in the past that it has happened. Now they are trying to endanger it and thus force Ukrainian withdrawal. We have reports that the Russians supposedly have now conquered the northern part of the airport, a direct contradiction to what the recent Twitter rumor is, of which I haven't seen a picture yet, even though there might be that there was a successful counterattack. But the northern part of the airport was still contested, was still under Ukrainian control, and the Russians now claim it. It seems kind of likely that they actually achieved conquering it and are now threatening Optune, again with the aim to encircle Avdiivka. There are reports of further Russian offensive activity from Pisky towards Permovaiske, here, again, west of Donetsk. And the so-called Donetsk People's Republic are saying they're pushing their positions forward from their advancing from Pisky towards Tunenke, again, to encircle Avdiivka. In Marinka, there's report about further house-to-house fighting, and there seems to have been some successes in this regard. The reports say they probably gained a few blocks and advanced further out. The last report I have from Donbas is close to the border of Zaporizhzhia. Here we have the report that the Russians attacked towards Vremivka, which is here, and the Ukrainians say they were repulsed. In Zaporizhzhia, we don't have that crazy many news, just the usual thing, Groundhog Day, basically, what can be reported for the last month, probably 6 weeks or longer. Both sides claim the other side shelled the nuclear power plant. We don't really have any proof who did it, even though obviously it's more likely that one sided than the other, but that's something for a different moment. The Russian authorities, occupation authorities, are reported to have granted residence papers for Russians to settle down in Melitopol, and the Ukrainian resistance center is saying this is aimed at basically creating voters for the annexation referendum to influence the annexation referendum here. In Kherson, while all the attention is on Charkiw, Kherson is still activity going on. Now, at this point, we still don't really have full confirmation if Kherson was meant as a diversion or if it's the full main offensive and the Ukrainians are just exploiting here a weakness in the front. Even though it seems like this was a diversion, it's still not fixing action. The Ukrainians are still fighting heavily. They are still advancing now and then. There are small advances, but it's a really slow grind forward. In the German live stream, I was asked how high I see the likelihood of Kherson falling within the next 3 months, and I would say it's less than 30% as of now. As in the last months, several months, probably at least 4 months, there are reports of the Russians reinforcing their line, entrenching themselves. We have seen pictures of prefabricated bunkers being transported there. This is a heavily defensed Russian line where they have reinforced their troops and doubled them over the last 2 months. Probably one of the reasons they are now facing a collapse of their Kharkiv front here. That in this front, the Ukrainians achieve a massive breakthrough and can roll up the Russian front line seems thus highly unlikely. This more likely will be a slow grinding advance under artillery preparations with small advances now and then. The Ukrainians are still doing artillery attacks against the Russian logistics and command centers. They report hundreds of artillery attacks every day and occasional air attacks. And according to Ukrainian reports, they destroyed several munitions and fuel depots and destroyed them, which should, in theory at least, reduce the fighting power of the Russians significantly on the right bank of the Dnieper. And by the way, you always, right and left is always in the direction of the flow. So the northern bank is the right bank in this case. On the 8th, they reported several pontoon bridges and pontoon ferries to be hit on the Dnieper and the Inhulets. Dnieper is this, Inhulets is this river here, and especially that point here at Darivka is important as it allows the forces that have crossed the Dnieper close to the Novakakova Dam to reach Kherson. There are video reports of Russian soldiers crossing the Dnieper on a pontoon bridge. According to the size, it seems likely that it was at the Novakakova Dam, though I can't confirm that. And the video is made by a Russian soldier, and it was made during an artillery attack on the pontoon bridge, with causing heavy casualties. Heavy casualties, unfortunately, I'm not able to show you that video as it's pretty gore, and to be honest, the information value for the audience isn't that big. It just confirms us that not only do they still attack the pontoon bridges, the pontoon crossings, they actually hit Russian troops while they're on it, at least occasionally. The Ukrainians, and that was some fake news spreading around today, I at least saw it in German media, it might be different in the English speaking, that the Ukrainians have not achieved a breakthrough. Here in Kherson, they reported now that they have achieved since the beginning of the offensive advances between 2 and several dozen kilometers. So 2 kilometers is what, 1.3 miles. They achieved that, but since the beginning. In the north, they are still fighting between Vysokopilia and Novovosnesenske. Yeah, I think that was more or less right. I at least try to pronounce it more or less correctly. Those 3 towns were recently recaptured, and there seems to be still house-to-house fighting in Arhangelske, which is not yet confirmed to be in Ukrainian hands, but there have been successful advances along that line further south. In the Inhulets bridgehead, there were further attacks, but it also seems that now the Ukrainians attacked again after some Russian attacks. Russian military bloggers say Shastylye is liberated by the Ukrainians, which is here, which would mean the Ukrainians should be south of Kostomka as of now. That was the initial Inhulets bridgehead, and there is now a video from the Ukrainian side showing Blahudativka being in Ukrainian hands, a flag raised, but the Russian military bloggers already said, like roughly a week ago, that the Ukrainians had crossed close to Ternivka, the Inhulets, and conquered Blahudativka. So in this regard, it's kind of old news if we take both sides as sources. In the south, there seem to have been more intense fights again. They're still fighting at Snihurivka, which is here. There was fighting at Ternovi Podi. We will actually see a combat analysis on this channel within the next 2 weeks, probably. I have the video of the Ukrainians attacking it, and it is actually quite telling when it comes to tactics and infantry capabilities from the Ukrainian forces fighting there. Also, there have been fighting at Blahudatne, which is, where was it? Here, which is here. And the Russians say they recaptured Blahudatne after Russian air attacks, and that the Ukrainians are still and permanently attacking the Russian paratroopers, so that should be the VDV, with combat helicopters. So the Russians say Ukrainians are still attacking with combat helicopters. Again, a sign that the Ukrainian Air Force is still alive and still flying, as it's not just one attack. They actually insist that it's a number of attacks, continuous attacks by Ukrainian combat helicopters. The Russians claim the Ukrainians retreated after heavy losses from Seleni High, which is here, and Novohyrorivka. Can't remember if I know where that is. Yeah, it's here, which kind of doesn't make that much sense because we see a Ukrainian attack on this here, and they supposedly withdrew from here. But as said, those maps should be taken with a grain of salt as well, as they are not really every map takes open source material and judges it by its own metrics. So those maps should be considered more a rule of thumb than a real law. The Ukrainian General Staff says the Russian in some areas are preventing civilians from fleeing to use them as human shields. Again, here the mention in this regard, of course, the Ukrainian General Staff has an intention of making the Russians look in a bad light. Who would guess that you would paint your enemy in a war in a bad light? That doesn't mean they are wrong here. That just means that we shouldn't take every word like it's the word of God in this case. Whenever the Ukrainian General Staff says something, we should show some source critic and pay attention to what they're saying and whether it's actually true. From Crimea, we have some news. There was actually new smoke plumes about the Charkiw airbase. That's the base that was attacked with missiles, with a lot of Russian planes being destroyed. So at least there's some indication that it might have been attacked again. Also, there's smoke about Yevpatoria. In both cases, we don't know what it came from. It could theoretically be a house burning short, creating a local fire, but it might as well be an attack. And there are other reports about drone attacks and drones being shot down, but nothing really certain. I have some more news about the partisans. There's the Rosgvardia that has said in total, on the 7th of September, they said they took 137 Ukrainians prisoner who worked with the SBU, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and nationalist organizations. The Ukrainian General Staff said the Russians took 40 civilians prisoner in Kupiansk before the liberation by the Ukrainians. The explanation here was that they probably also wanted to prevent them from aiding the Ukrainian forces. The Russians said they took someone prisoner in Enerhoda. That's where the Zaporizhzhia power plant is, and that individual supposedly has helped the Ukrainians aim their fire on the Russian occupied side of the reservoir. The Ukrainian General Staff is saying partisans are working in conjunction with their armed forces in the oblast of Kherson to weaken the Russian logistics. And there is one indication of an explosion in Novo Oleksandrivka, close to Crimea, where before the explosion happened, a Russian ammo train entered coming from Crimea. So that would at least be a hint of maybe partisans blowing it up, but I don't have proof of that actually happening. But there was an attack on the We Together with Russia organization headquarters in Melitopol. It was attacked by an IED, and there are more detonations in Melitopol, where the mayor said the Russians turned 5 schools into military bases, and partisans destroyed one of that. Another heavy explosion was reported from Berdyansk. Again, we don't really know what was destroyed here. That was it in the areas. We have more information though. So the Russians said on the 4th of November will likely be the point in all the occupied regions for the referendi to hold for the annexation, because that's also the unity day in Russia. So it would kind of make sense to do it in the same day. The general prosecutor of the so-called DNR, the Donetsk People's Republic, has said he's going to have additional Ukrainian prisoners of war in front of court for war crimes, and the court cases will be seen in front of courts in Mariupol and Donetsk. And it's in previous cases, prisoners of wars have been sentenced to death. The occupation authorities in Kherson, Donetsk, and Charkiw and Zaporizhzhia said that they are going to confiscate and nationalize the property of refugees that have not returned on the 1st of October, to basically take away their stuff if they don't return. And the occupation, goddamn, I missed the word. The administration, the occupation administration of Kherson has said foreign observers are invited to join the annexation, even from the EU, to view it. But in the past, that has mostly been used by pro-Russian parties throughout Europe to send pro forma observers there that were not educated and not internationally recognized. We have one more really interesting news from the former security minister of the DNR, Alexander Khodorkovsky, and he said he demanded the Russian military, instead of doing new recruitment campaigns, to first focus on actually supplying the existing troops with what's necessary, and instead of creating new volunteer units or even mobilizing, Russia should focus less on creating cannon fodder and more on actually equipping the fighting units with what they need. That would be a stark reminder that a Russian mobilization might actually only have limited effect in the circus of in the circus of the current events. Other problems inside of Russia are that some volunteers are being paid not what they expect. There's one case where, because with technical excuse, with the excuse of technicalities, one hasn't received his full payment. The volunteer complained publicly, and the administration told him, no, the agreed payment and boni are only for volunteers on our local units, but you fought in another unit, so you don't get something. That's obviously not great for morale if your troops expect a certain payment and in the end don't receive it. The United Nations complained that the prisoners of war are not allowed to visit prisoners of war inside the Russian-controlled areas. The United Nations also said they have documented cases of torture, maltreatment, lack of food and water, as well as hygiene among the prisoner camps. And in Olenivka, that's the prisoner of war camp in Donetsk, where the Russians likely killed over 50, I think it was 59 prisoners of war by blowing up a building. At least that's the indication of what happens when you see the damages to the building, and that the Russians dug mass graves 2 days before the explosion happened. In that, there currently are infectious diseases that have broken out and are spreading among the prisoners of war. The Russians also prevented prisoners of war from contacting their families and explain their fate to them, which should, at least according to the Geneva Convention, they are entitled to contact their loved ones or their nation. I think I remember they are allowed to write one letter with 25 words a month, and that supposedly was prevented by the Russians. And the United Nations also documented 416 disappeared or imprisoned civilians in the Russian-occupied area. 166 of those were later released, but 16 of them were only found dead. Also, there are currently accusations towards Russia that between 900,000 and 1.5 million Ukrainians have been deported towards Russia. Hacker did hack apparently the Russian television stations on Crimea to play a speech by the Ukrainian President Zelensky from August the 30th, in which he promised the liberation of Crimea from the Russians. In the whole war, we now see one problem right now, which is the big issue of propaganda. I'm pretty sure none of you watching here has read my analysis during the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, where I heavily criticized the Armenian propaganda and thus faced the ire and displeased comments by Armenian friends as I attacked them. But the problem with Russia is facing now that basically its own propaganda is falling on its feet. Russia is selling this whole war as a special military operation, and despite all setbacks, they keep holding up the narrative that everything went to plan, at least until now, and thus they were unable to prepare commentators and the home front adequately what might happen if there are some setbacks. Patriotism might have led to additional volunteers when there is an explanation towards them how difficult it is, and that national act of effort is needed to win this important war. And the the home front would have had time to prepare itself for harsher situations and might have accepted it those harsher circumstances are coming in advance. All of this was missed, and instead of that, the Russian Ministry of Defense lied again and again, and thus is losing its credibility even within Russia, which might actually harm the war support within Russia. When you switch from completely destroyed Ukrainian units at the beginning of the Ukrainian offensive and then turn to slowly admitting actually they are gaining ground and they gain ground on us, that's an extremely painful thing and one that is discrediting your whole work. Now with the complete collapse of a front, to be able to explain that all of it went after plan will be much harder than it might have been necessary. And now we come to the complete collapse of the front. As it seems, it is actually has completely collapsed, and a stampede has started, which is one of the big challenges militaries can face at this point. As you can imagine, soldiers accept a certain risk to die. That's just the business, but a soldier usually thinks it's not going to be me. It's going to be the guy to my right and to my left. It's the same as with smokers. Everyone smoking cigarettes knows that it's a high threat of getting cancer, but everyone smoking cigarettes will likely think, nah, it's not me, it's just the others getting cancer. And this is kind of the same in this case, but once the whole front collapses, once you think you're actually losing, nobody wants to be that anymore. There's this saying, nobody wants to be the last man to die in a war. And Russia, at least at this front, might have that problem as of now. That doesn't mean the war is over, but that means that Russia is in big trouble right now, but its big potential might actually recover from it. But so the whole situation, in one hand, shows us how rapidly a seemingly steady and seemingly one-sided situation can change. And when we come to judging the whole situation, while it's justified to be happy with the Ukrainian successes, if you're on the Ukrainian side, you should not celebrate the day before the evening. I think we say that just in German, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure my English-speaking audience will understand that. So you shouldn't celebrate something before it's actually over. It might actually happen that the whole war turns back around, but it is a little too early to say. What the Russians are facing now is that their whole forces have collapsed and that there's a mass rout happening. If they aren't able to stabilize it, they are having some chances of doing it. For instance, the eastern side of Kupiansk is a perfect opportunity for them. With the bridge blown up, that the Ukrainians will cross them within a day is highly unlikely. But to re-establish a steady front line, they basically are forced to pull it further back from the Ukrainian tips of the spear, from the Ukrainian tip of the spear. If they are just trying to push own reinforcements into the Ukrainian advances, then those will likely just being ground up. So the perfect methodology of the Russians would now be to take some elite units, trying to slow down the Ukrainians without even attempting to stop them, just to slow them down, to stack up their reinforcements in a position that is well supplied and easy to defend, and give the people some rest, because somebody who has fled for several days is not in a capability of fighting, even if he's in perfect health. You can imagine that when you flee from Izium, at that point you run and you think the Ukrainians are running you over. When you're on that way here, you're not thinking about fighting. You don't think that war might not be lost, that you might have a chance to fight another day. You want to get out of there and you want to stay alive. If there somebody forces you to dig in here again and the Ukrainians come, you're much more likely to run again. And every one of those routes weakens the fighting power of those units routed even further. So what the correct procedure would likely be to take back the front far enough, stabilize it, give the guys a few days rest, a warm meal, a warm bed, and after a few days of realizing, okay, the Ukrainians maybe are not invincible monsters coming in and taking me by the night and dragging me off to Mordor. Once you realize that, your morale starts climbing again, and at some point you have a chance of defending. But we are at a phase right now, at least in some parts of the front, where we are still in that early phase where the Russians have barely a chance of stopping them, at least unless they are really lucky. The Ukrainian offensive seems to be in a fairly good role as of now, and we will have to see whether they outrun their supplies or reach their objectives before it stops. As of now, There are some reports of the Ukrainians crossing here and being at Lyman. I have read some reports that Lyman is actually freed. Yesterday, I think it was a pro-Russian telegram said Lyman is being attacked by 3,000 to 5,000 Ukrainian fighters. I have not heard visual and I have not seen visual proof of Lyman being freed. The Russian side was saying they evacuate Izium, Kupiansk, and Yampil. So Yampil should likely also be free, but obviously we can't say where the forces have retreated to, whether, for instance, they just try to set up a new defensive line here. This is currently the situation. As I think it is justified at this phase to say that the Russian Kharkiv Oblast front has collapsed, but that doesn't mean by no means that the war is over. So let's take in here some more points before we can continue further. We see one of the results of such a route. One moment, please. One route we see here that is not just ground gained, but it's also taking prisoners, destroying equipment, and capturing a lot of equipment that the fleeing forces have to leave behind and that they can't blow up. Here we have the example of a BMP-2M. This is actually the first time I saw one in this war. I might have just missed a few of them, but a modernized version of the fairly sturdy and old BMP-2 with actually thermal vision, 4 anti-tank missiles ready to fire, and an automatic grenade launcher. So a pretty powerful IFV at this point, captured here by the Ukrainians. And there we can also talk about the capturing that every one of you probably has seen on the Oryx block. It needs to be set somewhat right here, as I've actually read from news articles in the past that claimed that the Ukrainians have more tanks than they had in the beginning because they captured so much from the Russians. What we have seen is that some of the captured vehicles are actually being dismantled. They are stripped for parts, which would not be an indication of them actually being in a fighting conditions. And I can say from my military training, when I made a military driver's license, one part of our training was to actually teach us how to damage our vehicles in case we have to retreat and leave them behind. And depending on how much time we have, how much thoroughly we can destroy them. And one of them was just to take the rifle. At that time, we still had the 7.62 G3 to just shoot through the engine block to destroy the engine. That would obviously not really be visible. So in a case like this, where the Ukrainians say they captured a BMP-2M, that doesn't mean that thing is actually in fighting condition. It obviously, with thermal vision and all of this, you might expect a number of digital displays inside, and it's quite possible that the fleeing Russian has taken the butt of his rifle and just crushed those displays and destroyed the gun. So just to judge when you read about captured equipment, that captured equipment might be true, even though we have some examples where the Ukrainians themselves destroyed captured equipment later, but that was more in March, where they probably were afraid of the Russians taking the captured equipment and rather destroyed it than handing it back over to the previous owner. This seems less likely here, but some of the equipment might look fine, but might more or less be useless. But that also, the capture also means things that they take from the Russians, like obviously a Russian carrying 2 brand new pens in his backpack or a teddy bear. So more examples of Russian looting, but that also means tons of ammunition, artillery shells, bullets, anti-tank weapons. We have more here. Tons and tons of military equipment, and we can see here an example where the Ukrainians mock for what they found. You can read the subtitle. The anti-tank missiles here, spades, helmets, more anti-tank missiles, washing powder, and obviously a washing machine. This is an example I less want to tell you what it's saying here. It's claiming that he said he was sent to the front line with a tank that's gun didn't even shoot. This is an example of, and yes, he says like he was probably given that Ukrainian army code from the Ukrainians. But this is an example of potential war crimes by the Ukrainian, which shouldn't be kept an eye, where we shouldn't keep our eyes shut, especially when we complain about Russian war crimes too. The Geneva Convention says that prisoners of war should not be humiliated. They should not be presented in the public for the purpose of being humiliated, and that they can't be forced to give statement that is not leaving the realms of them identifying themselves. What we have here is one accusing the Russians of equipping him with horrible equipment. We've seen that in the past. Others were actually forced by the Ukrainians to curse Putin, curse Russia, curse the war. In this case, it is always possible that he himself offered to talk about that he was asked to and said, yeah, why not, whatever. But in a case, this is at least in a gray zone, and it might be a potential war crime. It's obviously something different than when you rape children to death, than when you torture people and kill them. It's a little different to humiliate a prisoner of war, but it's a war crime nonetheless, and it shouldn't be swept under the rug and ignored. Here's now actually what I wanted to show initially, the bombardment of Charkiw. As you can see, the hits within the civilian area of the town, of the city that is behind the front lines, so no military purpose whatsoever being here. And we now hear the air raid siren, us maybe being too late in this case. As said, the Twitter usually claims that it's supposed to be a revenge bombing, but somebody who follows the war for a couple of months will know that it was more or less a daily occurrence. But there are also reports now about new war crimes in the freshly liberated areas in the direction of what happened at Bucha. But here again, we obviously don't know how much of that is true yet. It'll come out over time what the Russians did here. Now this is a video supposedly showing Ukrainians crossing the Sieversky Donetsk towards Liman. In the German channel, I actually misidentified it first and I wasn't sure that it's accurate, but supposedly they're crossing the bridge here, which is actually really surprising because that's the bridge at Ryhorodok, which is right at Sloviansk. And as we can see here, it's that footbridge, that road bridge, and that's the railroad bridge. So he's actually driving in the right direction. But that bridge seems to be still standing after months of fighting, interestingly enough. Now, those are informations that are always asked in those chats and in the streams. How many losses did the Ukrainians have? I'm giving you here some numbers. And if you don't like those numbers, what about those numbers? 7,000 soldiers, 457 main battle tanks. Now, a lot of you here are new and have watched one video of me, and so they don't really know how I'm working. Basically, I don't believe any of that. If you have 7,000 soldiers taken prisoners, I would expect a few more pictures, and not in a humiliating way, but I would expect them marching off at the distance or something, some proof of it. Other than that, those claims are pointless to me. We heard a lot of claims by the Russians in the same directions and never have seen the prisoners of war materialize that they were claiming. 457 tanks is an amazing number. I don't see any proof of that. We might see the proof coming up in the future weeks. The Red Cross, the International Red Cross, should on the Ukrainian side actually should have access to prisoners of war. So we might get official numbers there, how many were actually taken prisoners. Some of them might still be wandering in the fields, being dispersed from their units, still not being taken prisoner, but far behind the Ukrainian line, somewhere in these areas, as we've seen in the past in other videos, even where we see people being left behind. That might be the case here too, but those numbers should not be taken serious as of now. I mostly rely on what is proven in pictures, and the rest is being taken as a propaganda tool inside of that war. Now, that's an interesting message, which is that a Russian lieutenant general has been taken prisoner. That video was being spread around, and supposedly it's the same person. Now, I always have an issue when I see those videos. Even seemingly identical persons often enough turn out not to be the same persons. I might not be the greatest at recognizing one face in comparing it one face to the other. In this case, he might be it, he might not be it. I have not found confirmation yet that I trust, and I have not seen anyone proving the opposite. So at this point, we should take it with a grain of salt, and which should take it as more or less as a rumor not being proved. But that interesting part is that Lieutenant General Andrei Sychevoy was the commander of the Western District of the Russians. He was relieved of his command on September 3rd, so just 7 days before now, right before the beginning of the offensive, and seemingly was overrun here and taken prisoner. That would be the highest general taken prisoner since World War II, as I've read. I have not confirmed that. That might be untrue, but it seems more or less right. And we have the English article being here somewhere. Whatever. It would be too long to search it now. And Chuck Farah has said this is remembers that this is a flag officer, and usually they are not really taken prisoner. What we have here is really interesting. Now this shows, I'm pretty sure you can read it. This shows the issues the fighters have here, claiming that they are not being equipped, that their officers are stealing everything, that they get bad equipment while the officers are running around and using the trucks to loot and plunder. But the interesting part is that that's a lot of Russian fighters also claiming, probably from Donbass, complaining about their situation. You also see the fairly high age of that person complaining here. And they say they should, let me advance a little. They should send the prosecutors. They don't care. And when you see it, the camera turning to the side, you see that it's 2 more trucks, partly filled with soldiers here. So we have a whole squad here, basically in mutiny, complaining. Now, when you see this, and I might just post this in the chat for you to see it. When you see this, what do you think how well those people complaining to their officers, being mistreated like this by their officers, how well these people will fight? And then how well these people will fight when they think they're in a losing battle. And that's another explanation why the Russian front has collapsed that far along the Charkiw line. If troops like this are there, they don't know what they're fighting for. They're being mistreated. They basically see their own officers as their enemy. And that's not a good way to create an army that has cohesion, discipline, and morale. Another thing here, and that would be an indication of it, it's the pro-Russian telegram. I can't confirm it, though, that it's right, but supposedly the commander of the 2nd Motorized Rifle Division fled from Izium 2 days before and leave his troops behind. The interesting part here is that Ukrainian military intelligence says that how this was achieved. I'm pretty sure I have a lot of American audience that can be happy to see that the HARM missile will likely have played a big role. And I've seen videos of Buk missile systems accompanying the advancing troops, and as a German, and that's obviously, that whole presentation is also kind of tailored for my German audience. The German Gepard Cheetah was also having a significant impact in the successes. We have other examples that might show some indication of how the front collapses and how the morale is. That's a recorded phone call. Again, those are usually coming from the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence. Again, active war participant has an interest of lying. At some point, it becomes unlikely that they put that effort into faking phone calls. Seeing the rest of what we have from information of the front, those phone calls seem to be more or less authentic, but that doesn't mean they are absolutely true. In this case, LPR fighter says half of his regiment was captured by the Ukrainians. But again, we would have to see where those prisoners of war are, and we might see that in the future. That's an interesting infographic I found on Twitter, where we see what effect the Western supply of arms had. In the beginning, the Ukrainian soldiers were at 1.5 times less the strength, weaker than the Russians. Now they are twice as strong. In tanks, the advantage of the Russians has turned from roughly 4 times to only 1.5 times. In armored vehicles, it has slightly been reduced, the advantage, the Russian, from 6 times to 5 times. And in artillery, it has actually worsened, which will likely also be influenced by the fact that the Ukrainians still have a lot of 152 millimeter and 122 millimeter artillery, for which it has become really difficult to source ammunition, as there seem to be 3 factories in Europe now producing those, or capable of producing them. At least my Discord has researched a little, helped me research. There is a factory in the Czech Republic, and there seem to be one more in Romania and one in Bulgaria, still producing 152 grenades. Depending on their volume of output, they might be able to help the Ukrainians get some ammunition, but it's unlikely, obviously, that those 3 factories can fulfill the full demand. But what will help there is obviously this here, what we see here. Because some of it, at least, will be artillery shells, and that will help the Ukrainians and allow them to some degree to keep up their artillery fire. Now, what we have here is something interesting. The Russian envoy to the United Nations Security Council has said the Western weapons are not playing a decisive role in the battlefield in Ukraine. Then you might wonder, so what's going to happen once the Western weapons actually arrive and play a role? What is going to happen then? Are the Ukrainians then going to be in front of Volgograd and Moscow? Because there is more to come, and that is here an example: more ammo for the HIMARS, more 105 millimeter howitzers and 36,000 shells, additional HARMs, 100 Humvees, 1.5 million rounds of ammo, more than 5,000 anti-armor systems, 1,150 millimeter rounds of remote anti-armor mine systems. That's really interesting, because that system means that let me check it here. That the Ukrainians, for instance, in a case like this here, when Russian forces are reinforcements are coming this way towards Kupiansk, they can use a Panzerhaubitze 2000, the German howitzer, or an M777, whatever they have here, the French César. They can use it to shell the approaching lines of communications. Shell them with these shells. It will spread anti-tank mines in the area, and especially when it's at night and the convoy just rumbles in, it'll blow up a few of the tanks, a few of the trucks transporting them. That will not necessarily destroy them, but it should slow them down drastically, force them to reroute, and thus give the Ukrainians a massive tactical advantage, as they can shape the battlefield in a way where they can deny areas to the Russians from a distance, even behind the enemy front line. They don't have to go out and lay the mines. They can just basically shoot the mines, and that's obviously giving the Ukrainians a significant advantage. Other smaller things, night vision and all of this, is also important, but is a less sexy item for me to present to you. And from Germany, we have another news which is highly frustrating for anyone thinking who is I always insist on the German channel to explain to the people that I'm not neutral in a conflict like this. You can't be neutral if you're somewhat feeling involved, but what I can try is to be as objective as possible. That's why I do source critic, and that's why I mention Ukrainian crimes as well, but it doesn't change the fact that my heart is beating for one of the sides, and that's the side that's being attacked. And the Ukrainian side has been in Germany and had offered a plan for them to receive Leopard 2 tanks. The industry would play ball, and the first tanks would only arrive in 36 months, but then coming out of industrial production, and at least they would come in 36 months, and we all don't know how long that war might continue. And the German chancellor is basically ignoring it and blocking it, as well as he blocks the offer from the industry to deliver Marder IFVs and Leopard 1 tanks to the Ukrainians, of which the industry has offered hundreds. Now, this is interesting. It should have been Ben Hodges again. Exactly, Ben Hodges. I've recently, yesterday, I think I've seen a video of him where he said the Ukrainians are going to reach the lines from February 23rd at the end of the year. And now he's saying within a year, he claims that they are going to retake Crimea. Now, first of all, Ben Hodges isn't anyone. He's a former lieutenant general, and he was the commander of CENTCOM. I think it's CENTCOM that commands Europe from the American side, and he had the responsibility of arming and training the Ukrainians between 2014 and 2017, if I'm not completely wrong. So he should know the Ukrainians a lot better than many of us, and he actually is taking the risk of basically staking his reputation publicly that the Ukrainians will not just reach the lines from February 23rd, but actually are able to reconquer Crimea. While I personally have my doubts, I have to respect that Ben Hodges basically said the Ukrainians are going to win this war within 2 or 3 weeks after the war began. And as of now, it seems like he might actually have a chance of being correct. That part is more interior politics in Germany, but it might be interesting. 70 for the English audience too. 70% in Germany in the survey said they think that Ukraine should still be supported even if the energy prices are exploding, and that's the different party affiliations, which isn't or just an example. That's the hard left and that's the hard right. From the hard, both parties, they're publicly basically say, the invasion isn't that cool, but Russia's aims and Russia's feelings are very important as well. But their voters apparently don't necessarily agree with them fully. And among the left, actually almost two thirds are supporting the fact that Ukraine should be kept in support even if energy prices go up. And when it comes to weapons in Germany, at least 40% say it should be supplied better, stronger than before. The West should supply Ukraine more, and 30% as of now, so 70% agree that Ukraine should at least receive the same supply it is receiving now, if not more. Now, we have 2 reports from Russia that a local council in St. Petersburg has asked the Duma to file charges for high treason against Putin, and another one that is coming from Moscow, basically asking for the same. Now, at this point, it seems highly unlikely that this is going to lead to anything, but it shows a slowly growing dissent within Russia that will at some point cause problems for the Russians. And those are 2 videos I'm just going to post you to not drag it out much longer of Russian propaganda TV. Maybe open it and save it while I'm taking a zip. And then I'm going to go to the question and answer area. And I'm afraid that as this isn't organized yet about the stream questions, and I still have to reorganize it in the future, that I might miss a few questions as they slip out through how the chat is done. In the German chat, I have people writing down, copying the questions to make sure I actually don't miss any. This hasn't been done here yet, but maybe we'll do that in the future. So I hope you apologize if it's not perfect today. At least I see we have a fairly nice audience for the, I think, second stream, and the last one was basically me just talking into the camera as of usual. So please excuse me while I take a quick sip, and then we go to the question and answers. Do you think the Russians would have faced similar problems during the Cold War if the war became hot? It seems like the corruption, which is generally a problem in dictatorships and especially in communist dictatorships, at least you would expect them to be less big. And the other thing is the Russian forces were significantly higher. So I think some of those problems are not new, but the extent to it seems to be that it's new. We have the report from the Russian paratrooper who basically fled Russia now and accuses it of is now opposing the war, and he re-enlisted out of lack of other opportunities, I think over 10 years after his first tenure in the military. And his report shows that how frustrated he is with what was shown, that he wasn't even given a weapon initially, that the food was horrible, that they didn't have toilets, that they didn't have a bed. He actually slept in a hotel initially after having re-enlisted in the army, because the barracks were such garbage. So the situation must have worsened dramatically over 10 years, as his memory was far more positive about the army in the past. So that problem likely existed somewhat in the past as well, but it must have increased massively now in the last years, where the corruption in Russia went from bad to worse. Has the latest hardware provided by the US given the Ukrainians a chance to hit the Crimea bridge? There's still doubt whether they have actually received the ATACMS. I have no idea how you Americans pronounce this, ATACMS, the long-range missile for the HIMARS system, which would have the range. The Ukrainians have 2 systems of that range as well, but both were in prototype status, and one of them with a 500-kilometer range, one of them with roughly 300 kilometers. Both of them should be able to reach the Kerch Bridge, but you would expect them that they have been used at this point right now, and the Ukrainian side has claimed that they received some extended range HIMARS ammunition, like extended range GLMRS, with a range of up to 220 kilometers, they mentioned. So as of now, it doesn't seem that they are likely to be able to attack the bridge until the Americans supply them with the ATACMS. Whether they will is obviously a question as of now. There is no proof of them actually already being in Ukraine, but that's a political decision, not a military decision. The Americans were hesitant to deliver long-range rocket systems out of fear of escalation in case the Ukrainians would, for instance, start to bombard Belgorod or Kursk. But as the Ukrainians have proven that the trust in them is justified, they have, as the information is as of now, not used the HIMARS system to attack anything within the Russian Federation. And seemingly they actually coordinate with the Americans what target they are allowed to attack. If they gain enough trust, it might actually become to a point that they reach it, as the American side, as far as I know, has said the Crimea. The Ukrainians are not allowed to use it against Russian territory, but Crimea is Ukrainian territory, and thus the Kerch Bridge might be attacked at a later point. But as of now, I can't really, I don't have any proof of it being working. Okay. How long until Ukraine gets F-16? I think 200 would be most excellent. Well, a nice question. The problem is it's extremely unlikely. The issue is, while the US might have enough F-16 in reserve and could squeeze out a few here and there, the problem is the lack of pilots. It's probably likely that a Ukrainian can more or less fly the F-16 after a month and is fairly proficient after 6 to 9 months with it. And whether they actually manage to get a maintenance crew up to speed within 9 months is quite questionable, but that might be achievable too. But all of this assumes that we take Ukrainians who are already pilots. And that's the big thing. Everything that's happening right now is that the Ukrainians are basically living off of the pilots they have in reserve, of their current stock of pilots and pilots that were recently retired. 200 F-16 would require at least 200 pilots. Usually an army has at least 10% more. That's at least my knowledge. Most armies have a little more pilots than planes, often at least. And in this case, they don't even have the pilots. Now, of course, we can play with the idea that maybe they could use commercial pilots and retrain them. After a few months of training, they might be able to fly an F-16, but are they capable of learning air combat tactics in that time frame as well? So how much would be achieved in that? And if the F-16s given them aren't the most modern ones, their skill is much more important, or even more important. And fighting against, if they receive block 20 or something, the earliest ones that are about to be turned into drones, fighting against Sukhoi Su-35 might be a fair challenge, and putting a commercial pilot into the cockpit would probably be close to suicide then. So 200 is highly unlikely. A realistic number is probably no more than 30, if we are perfectly honest. And I didn't get any news of them being trained yet, but the Americans didn't publicly announce that they are training, that they are supplying harm as well. So it might be possible that there's some training happening. Obviously, the F-16 would be the best choice for that mission. But as of now, as I said, 200 is unfortunately highly unlikely. Why doesn't the US just supply them with Abrams, since we already have a huge stockpile of them? 36 months is too long for a handful of new Leopards. The issue here is that anything that is supplied to the Ukrainians requires training. And if you take an experienced tank crew and put them in an Abrams, and explain it to them, this button means this, and you turn the turret like this, and this is how you shoot, and then you train them, after a week they can probably run that thing. That doesn't mean they are proficient in that. And in combat, it is muscle memory, and it's about being proficient. If you are looking through the thermal vision, through your binoculars, through your gunnery scope, and you don't know where exactly the button is you need to push to adjust, to do the laser range fighting, to do certain missions. So you have to get away, look down, and look for the button and push it. That means you're losing valuable time, and you might actually lose sight of the target. That is a big issue, but you could say that's the Ukrainians' problem. Of course, that will mean higher losses, but that's a price they have to pay. That's war. So that's just what's happening, and that's a fair argument. The issue, though, is that the crew isn't all. It's almost more important, the maintenance, and this is a completely different system. Both Leopard and Abrams are completely different systems built after a different philosophy, which also, by the way, allows for different doctrine, different fighting, and thus for different capabilities, which isn't the biggest issue. Then the Ukrainians wouldn't fully use the tank by its full extent of its capabilities, but they could still use it. The problem is a tank is on the front line, is facing fighting, has to jump over ledges, has to jump over trenches, is running over trees and through walls and everything. All of this, it puts a strain on the vehicle, so it has to be maintained permanently, and it has to be kept running perfectly, as perfect as possible, because if anything fails, the crew is likely dead. Whereas if on the Panzerhaubitze 2000, the artillery piece, the German one, if there's something fails, well, unpleasant, then it is 10, 20, 30 kilometers behind the front line, and you have to get a tow truck, basically, you have to tow it, but that's it. But on the front line, in an advance towards the enemy, everything has to work perfectly, or the crew is dead. And for that, you need a crew that a trained mechanics, a full supply system, full supply logistics, spare part logistics, and that is more the big issue than the tank crew. So thus, even though it pains me to say it, it is actually probably the wiser choice to supply nations within Europe, and if you find them outside of Europe with modern Western equipment that is actually better than the T-72 those nations might have. And just to give the Ukrainians the less powerful T-72s, just for the fact that they already know how to handle it. They have crews trained on it. They have mechanics knowing how to repair it. They have the spare parts, and they know how to do it. That's the biggest issue, not the amount of tanks that are there. But obviously, once that source has run dry, and the question is how far can they extend it? That's a political question too. In theory, the Indians have, 2,000? T-72s, but are the Indians willing to destroy their relationship with the Russians, which is a tight-knit defense industry, defense cooperation, if you look at the equipments the Indians have? But should the West be able to find other nations, we will obviously try to exchange their tanks with more modern Western tanks, but that source will run dry at some point, and then basically it's more or less the Abrams that are left for choice for a potential choice to supply the Ukrainians, as the supplies of other tanks is fairly limited. How many Leopard 2s are in working condition and not in the current armed forces of a nation, or not already planned to be introduced? Because with the changes of the security environment now, with the realization that the conventional war is back even within Europe, armies will increase size over time and likely will need new tanks. And it's obviously far cheaper to take your Leopard 2A4 out of storage and modernize it than to buy a new one. So that supply will likely run dry, and then it will have to be the Abrams, or they won't get new tanks. There again, you can just hope that the Americans are already planning ahead and secretly training the first mechanics how to maintain them, which seem to be more important than the actual tank crews, but that is pure speculation whether it's already happening. Could you explain the politics behind the refusal of the Chancellor to approve the various German-Ukrainian arms scenes? I think I explained it in some part yet. The German armed forces are highly skeptical because they feel like they are basically out of equipment anyways, and they don't have the money to maintain it well for various other reasons. But the German army is unhappy that the German politicians have given the Ukrainians the self-propelled howitzers, not because the German army is somewhat Russia-friendly. The majority should be on the Ukrainian side, from what I know, but because they feel they already have too few of those howitzers, let alone to be able to hand them out. That's one part. So the German army basically doesn't have anything you can give them. And of that shouldn't be given, some was already given to the Ukrainian, which leaves only the industry from now on. And the industry there, it's pure speculation. Now, there has been some political scandals in the state where he has been prime minister. And one of the persons connected supposedly is having asylum in Russia. So there are some conspiracy theories that they might have some compromising documents about him. Then he's part of a party that is traditionally more Russia friendly than other parties, that has at least a strong pro-Russia wing. Then you have that part in politics in Germany that always has some romantic visions of the 19th century and believe that Prussia and Russia had good connections and good relations, and Europe was always, and Germany was always well when we kept our good relationship with the Russians, and thus we should not humiliate and completely defeat the Russians. And while they might not say it in fully, they probably think it's best to basically make the Ukrainians strong enough to stop the Russians, but not that strong that they can defeat them, because that would weaken the Russians and that would make the Russians desperate. And then maybe they use nuclear weapons, and then the dangerous radiation comes. So there are some irrational fears involved, some historic romanticist ideas, and some interior politics. Some are genuinely pro-Russia friendly. That's also having an influence. But it's a conglomerate of those factors. So it can't be really being explained in detail, but that's like a summary of the issues that German politics, that threaten German politics when it comes in this regard, when it comes to that regard. There are 3 doors into Kherson. They have been closed. There are 3 doors from Crimea. I think this is the obvious next step. Well, Kherson is surely threatened by now, but it might be a little exaggerated. We will have to see over time. Now, they still run the ferries. Now they have the issues that the ferries can be hit and that they are being hit, and they are suffering losses. But the ferries are running, and we shouldn't forget that Russia has had one of the biggest helicopter transport wings in the world. Before the war, roughly 770 Mi-8, each of them being able to lift 4 tons of supplies. Now, that should more or less be enough to fly in. Obviously, that would mean, in theory, if they would use all 770, that would mean stripping all the units everywhere else from it. That's unrealistic. Then it's logistics. Where do they park? Where are they refueled? Where are they maintained? So it's unrealistic that even close to 700 are being used there. But that shows at least that there is a potential of using helicopter supply as well. And the helicopters obviously can fly low enough that they can even drop the supply from the air, and they can fly low enough that they are not being shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. So there is a way to still supply the western bank of the Dnieper, even though it's definitely much harder, and getting, for instance, new tanks in will require a lot of more effort and some losses on the way as the pontoon bridges and ferries are being bombed. Do you think it is near for Putin to use tactical nukes to avoid the final defeat? I'm not a Russia expert. I cannot emphasize that enough. I have my skills, I have my knowledge, but interior Russian politics and the depthness of the Russian soul are not among them. But those people I listen to, who I trust as Russian experts, say that it's highly unlikely, and at least logic confirms it. We need to see that this war has begun with Putin claiming that the Ukrainians are basically Russians that are being oppressed by a small Nazi minority, which are the puppets of NATO. That's to summarize it roughly. So you have 42 million Ukrainians, which are basically Russians, and they have a small clique of criminal Nazis suppressing them, and we are coming to liberate them. Now, the political explanation of then using tactical nukes is pretty tough. And according to that, explaining it in their own country, in interior politics, that tactical nukes are being used in a country you're supposedly liberating, seems indeed far-fetched. So while I can't say that it's not going to happen, at least those people that I believe they actually know what they are talking about, seems it's highly unlikely that he's going to use tactical nukes, even if he is being threatened by defeat. How do you think Russia could react if they are threatened to lose Crimea? To be perfectly honest, at this point, I'm highly doubtful that the Ukrainians can actually capture it. We see the small areas where they can advance, where they have to advance, as they lack any amphibious capability to speak of. They have to go through the land bridge, basically through here. Everything else seems to be more or less dams and bridges that can be blown up, that can be blocked basically more or less with a machine gun and an anti-tank rocket. They obviously could use small motorboats to cross the water here or through here, but that would mean they come without supplies, they come without heavy weapons, and whether that's actually a possibility, it's highly doubtful. Now, the Russian military doctrine sees escalate to de-escalate, which means in case of a threat of conventional defeat and a threat to the integrity of Russia, they are allowed to use tactical nukes to increase the escalation, in a way to say, we are willing to use nukes, so stop. Basically stop, or it's getting worse. And in that case, as they have annexed Crimea and consider Crimea to be a part of Russia, military doctrine would justify Russian military doctrine, if I understand correctly, would justify the use of tactical nukes in this way. Is it going to happen? Obviously, I can just guess here, but I said I start with the doubt that the Ukrainians are actually going to enter the war, because at some point, if the defeats continue, Putin will stand in front of the choice, basically of three choices. Declare victory while he still has something positive, making a deal with the Ukrainians that allows him to save face and maybe give the three regions the choice for self-determination, where he expects them to join Russia, because all three regions as of now seem to actually have a clear majority pro-Russian annexation. At least those occupied for 8 years, fighting for 8 years, and having indoctrinated for 8 years. That part is a different story. But this would allow him to save face. And if he makes the deal that the Ukrainians just claim, okay, we give up joining NATO, he could say, okay, so they are not going to join NATO. I've demilitarized them because we killed so many of their troops and destroyed so many of their equipment. And we denazified them because in Mariupol we killed the Nazis. We got the Azov regiment that was fighting there and we destroyed it. And that would allow him a way out. That would basically be the second way. Tactical nukes, the first one, a peace deal that saves him, allows him to claim victory and allows him to save face, but it gives the Ukrainians a lot. Immediate return to the February 23rd line, the option to regaining the 3 territories, and Zelensky the power to claim I have defeated the Russians, but now I say let's stop the war because another 100,000 of us die and we will get them back, and if they actually don't want to join, so what, let them leave. Obviously nationalists wouldn't be happy, but that might be a deal that's possible. But then again, I'm not a Ukraine expert either, so interior politics might stop that. And the third option, to come back to that, is full mobilization. We shouldn't forget Russia hasn't mobilized yet. Now a mobilization would take many, many months, if not even years, to take full effect, as there are no more trainers there. The trainers are fighting in Ukraine. Of course, there are some left, but a lot of the trainers have left in combat units. A lot of the gear that was ready, being kept fairly ready to be in use, is already now being in use because they suffered so heavy losses. And then the question is, how long will it take to turn 1 million or 2 fresh recruits, to even clothe them, to train them for more than a month, and then to give them trucks and tanks, which might exist, but which right now are rusting in the field and first have to be put into factories with an output of 200-300 a month to fully repair. So a full mobilization would take a year at least, probably in full effect, unless the Russians are rushing in hundreds of thousands to just use them as cannon fodder in human wave attacks. So Russia basically, in face of defeat, Russia has 3 options: tactical nukes, trying to do a face-saving deal, or do full mobilization. Whatever they do, the experts say nuclear weapons seem highly unlikely, so you have 2 options left. Whatever of those they choose, I can just guess, but I can't really answer it finally. And obviously Crimea would be a threat of that defeat, where one of the 3 options would definitely be pulled in my book. Okay, there was a question. Will winter shift the balance in favor of Russia or Ukraine? I don't believe the winter will have the biggest effect. In general, both sides should be more or less prepared for winter in general, because they are both locals, more or less. Now, there are rumors of the Russians not having enough winter clothing, but we have heard a lot of rumors in this war. You remember the big convoy here, where they first ran out of fuel, and then the popular channels claimed now all their batteries are empty. First, all their fuel is out because they kept the engines running to stay warm, and then after that they kept the ignition on to be able to radio. So all their batteries are now empty, and now the convoy is stuck for the next month. And a few days later, the convoy was gone because it had moved. So whether those are rumors that the Russians don't have winter clothing or not, I'm going to wait for proof. The Ukrainians should not have issue with winter clothing, because even if they don't have enough for their full mobilized force, there should be enough opportunity from the West to equip them. The West has a lot of textile factories as well, and clothing and so on that can be produced in need. The biggest issue will be for the civilians that are living in apartments where the windows are shattered from bomb blasts from shrapnel, and live in areas with no running, no hot water, and no gas. That's why Ukraine is trying to evacuate several 100,000 from the Donbas. But when it comes to equipment, the Soviet equipment is more or less equal on both sides. There might be a difference, though, in the equipped Western equipment. When we look, for instance, to the Bushmaster armored vehicle, I think it's an APC. You would probably call it an APC. That, for instance, whether that is as capable of going through 1 meter of fresh snow as a comparable Russian vehicle of that same sizes, that can at least be doubted to some degree. So I think more or less it should be more or less equal both sides. The Ukrainians might have issue with some of their equipment as it wasn't really made for that climate area, but I don't think a big shift in anyone's favor. What we will see now, as the Rasputitsa is going to come in 4 to 6 weeks, we should expect the offensive activities to die down. Because the Rasputitsa, which forces both sides to basically stick to paved roads, mean that the advances, the axes of attack, are predictable, and as they are fixed by asphalt. And that allows for much easier defense, and I don't see any side having the capability of accepting the losses, attacking thus prepared positions in this circumstances to take the losses that would be caused by just pushing through prepared defenses when they actually know on which exact way you're having to advance. So I would expect during the Rasputitsa, which will last until the first frost, until frost comes and solidifies the ground, I would expect the offensive to more or less, the offensives to slow down, not to stop completely. You can still use artillery and your infantry can still march by foot. So we will still see activity here along the Donbas and along Kherson, but no fast advances like this seem likely in that phase. Can you please say, get to the chopper? Okay, I think we've reached more or less the end, as many of you weren't prepared of that. I hope it was interesting enough for you. As said, this is something we are doing fairly regularly on the German channel, and we are at 1 hour and 30. Today I did this already for 3.5 hours on the German channel. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, feel free to recommend this channel to friends and acquaintances, and obviously spread the word so this channel can grow as much as it is possible. I'll try to organize it in the future to allow for a better moderation, to have the questions put together. This was more ad hoc now, and I saw some known faces from the German channel here, which obviously helped organize it, but there will have to be some moderation. And you have to see, the Germans are still awake at, 3 in the morning. So salute to my German supporters here that are still awake here, trying to support me setting up this stream. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget the thumbs up. If you're still watching and haven't subscribed yet, then come on. You're still watching that, so it can't be that bad. Subscribe. Push the bell button so you don't miss future videos. Recommend the videos to friends and families. Spread the channel around if you want to help me support me, to help me grow. And comment if you liked it. Comment with some offers or what you think, how far the Russians will go. I will focus on growing this channel, and there will be much more to come in the future. Thank you for watching, and have a good night. And that's still German too, because I still need to change that.